there's one great way of differentiating yourself from people in this industry, and that's actually build shit that works.
If you build it, they will, well, come back to the Wild Business Growth Podcast. This is your place to hear from a new entrepreneur every single Wednesday morning who's turning wild ideas into wild growth. I'm your host, Max Branstetter, founder and podcast producer at Max Podcasting. And you can email me at maxpodcasting.com to save time with your high-quality podcast. This is episode 206, which was the TV channel for SportsCenter on DirecTV growing up. I will never forget that. And today's guest is Barry Lunn. Barry is the founder and CEO of Provizio, which rhymes, so what's not to like? And Provizio is an incredibly fascinating accident prevention technology company who has some really, really cool technology that's a mix of AI and radars and different types of radars and robotics to help prevent accidents before they happen, especially with vehicles and autonomous vehicles as you look towards the future. In addition to that, Barry has founded several startups and sold several startups being in the spaces of aerospace, technology, as well as security. And in this episode, we talk through identifying problems, focusing, building companies around safety, creating better and more advanced and I guess more futuristic technology, and his passions for Legos and the sport of hurling. So don't hurl. This is Barry's podcast bootcamp. Enjoy the show. Alrighty, we are here with Barry Lunn doing some of the coolest and safest and tech-savvy and AI-focused things in the world. CEO and founder of Provizio, and before that, I guess you were kind of busy before that as well. Many companies, very tech-savvy serial entrepreneur. Barry, thank you so much for joining today out of Limerick. How you doing today?
It's great to be here, Max. Cheers. Yeah. I'm interested to see if I can make safety sound cool. We're about to find out, right?
Yeah, I think so. So we're going to talk about seatbelts for the duration of the... No, I'm just kidding. But I think many years ago when they invented the seatbelt, that was like a big thing in the car world in terms of safety, and obviously it's huge now. And now as we start to get towards autonomous vehicles, which I'm just like applauding myself because I never pronounced autonomous correctly, you're like steps and steps into the future and literally looking at cars in front of you and using AI to do that and be safe with crazy technology. So we will get into that, but I'd love to start with the fact that you left school somewhere around 5th grade. What was the reason for that?
Yeah, and look, it's a debate, right? So if in case any of my old teachers are listening, they might say he left. I think we pushed him. But yeah, I struggled in school, especially what we call our secondary school, the second level school here in Ireland. It was because what I suppose the potential that I guess teachers as well could see, but mostly me. I struggled with that more, with what I could see as my potential, and then my performance wasn't matching it, right? And I've never been much of a teacher pleaser, right? So I didn't really care too much what they taught, but I did think a lot of what I taught and what my family taught. And so I really struggled in school. And but basically, much later in life, I was diagnosed with dyslexia. And so there was just a slight mismatch going on at that stage. And it really just came out in those later years in school. And I just really, really struggled with it. So I dropped out, and then I went back again, and I dropped out again. And I ended up doing my kind of leaving cert, as we call it here, which is your pathway to university in Ireland, right? So it's like a big exam that it all comes out. I ended up doing that year essentially by myself for a finish, not attending classes, teaching myself, and that worked out, and that kind of got me out of that mix. And then once I went on to university, that suited me an awful lot more. But yeah, the school thing and me just did not mix, right?
Well, I think you turned out okay. It's funny you hear about people that were, dropouts in, high school or college, and you're at a much younger age, and so I think when you do that, there's probably some crazy reactions that friends and family had about like, oh, is Barry going to be okay? Like, what's next? What was the the chatter and rumor and gossip mill around you when you stopped going to school for a bit?
Yeah, it's a funny one, right? Because again, at that time, I wasn't probably performing, and so I guess people didn't have that high an opinion of me anyway, right? So they were like, "Hey, bum doing bum things," that kind of way. But at the same time, like I grew up in a working class Irish background, right? So it kind of didn't, like, it's not, my parents didn't finish school or go to university or anything like that. I didn't know that many people that did, right? And to be fair, so it wasn't like it. I mean, the worst thing you could do is not work, right? So I had a job and I went and worked. I went into sales, actually. I followed my dad. My dad was in the rag trades, clothes sales, and went and worked with him. So I had a job and I was selling, and I learned a lot in that. And to be fair, that once I was doing that, you get away with a lot in Ireland, right? If if you're out there grafting and you're going to work. In fact, it probably was going better than me, getting kicked out of school and getting in trouble and doing all that stuff. It was like, okay, he's working, he's going to do that. And it was more me. I put pressure on myself to go back, right? Like there was no pressure at home. I mean, I guess I would have been quite fragile mentally at that time as well, right? Because struggling with that. So my parents were clever enough to go, you know what? We push him. There's only one way, this could go, right? So I think that was kind of how we all dealt with it. And to be fair, especially dyslexia, and as you mentioned, lots of entrepreneurs drop out of college, and lots of them actually drop out of school as well, especially more my generation, the older ones, because dyslexia wasn't known about, and it's quite common in entrepreneurship that there's a dyslexic kind of a background, because it tends to match with just that way that mind works. It suits entrepreneurship maybe, and sales, but you also get good at covering stuff up, right? And so you kind of don't want to be seen as a dummy, right? And so you become really good at manipulating situations that your dyslexia doesn't go against you, right? And so I think that was something I learned as well, like that time as well, not consciously, but just you subconsciously. And I think those little things can stand to you later with this crazy world of founding companies.
Do you remember the first time that you got excited or intrigued by this idea of quote unquote entrepreneurship?
No, I still, that day still hasn't arrived for me, right? Like, I honestly, like, entrepreneurship, I never even heard of it, honestly, growing up, right? It just wasn't a thing, right? You can imagine if I, in our working class Ireland, going down to the lads in the pub and saying, here, I'm going to be an entrepreneur. That would have went down great. So like, that wasn't really my thing. But from as far back as I can remember, I just loved building stuff. When I was a kid, it was Lego, rooms full of Lego still, so I'm still a kid. But building, making stuff. My neighbor was a electronic engineering lecturer in the local university, and he had this garage full of bits, and I got into that, and so I always like, even with my toys, my mother would always say I never had any interest in playing with them. I always like took them apart, like literally on Christmas Day, taking the Skeletrix to pieces and trying to build it back together. That excited me, and I suppose then I was always kind of into sales. I kind of like selling stuff, right? And then just over time, get those two things mixed, kind of fit entrepreneurship, right? And I suppose, and I also, as I mentioned earlier, had that issue with authority, right? And so probably was never suited to working in a corporate environment. It wouldn't have fitted, you know what I mean? And the dyslexia thing as well is you tend to see the outcome a little earlier. They call it often the helicopter view in dyslexic terms. And so I would always be super frustrated at the pace that people worked at. And at the same time, they'd be frustrated with me because my mother used to say when I was younger, I was always building sandcastles in the sky. Could I build some on the beach, please? You know what I mean? That it was like, just maybe that reality distortion field, as they call it in Silicon Valley, but just always knew where I was going with something. And if people couldn't keep pace with that, it just drove me crazy. So that kind of led to just do my own thing. And that was kind of how I ended up in entrepreneurship. It was never like, oh, I'm going to be rich and build this huge company. I was probably more afraid of that. Like I wouldn't have even contemplated that. That wouldn't have been an ambition where I came from.
And looking back now, so you've always loved building things, and now you've built several companies, and there's some really cool exits in there as well. And so we don't have the time to talk about every single one of them, although I would like to go through each and one of your Lego things that you've built. But the one that I want to hit on is your most recent one before Provizio, and that's Oralis. This is a company that fits the mold of like someone like myself who's interested in tech but not incredibly crazy tech savvy, who I was reading the description for the company and I saw millimeter wave technology and I was like, wow, this is awesome. And then I was like, okay, so what does this mean? So it's a really, really cool company, but can you help explain exactly what you did with Oralis and what kind of problem that you were attacking there?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And by God, could I bore you to death with what Oralis did as well? But
please, you're welcome to bore me to any state you want.
No, absolutely. I'll try and avoid that. No, I mean, actually, the concept for Oralis was quite simple, right? In a way, I mean, the technology was super deep hard tech, right? But the concept was pretty simple, right? So millimeter waves, high frequency electronics is becoming much more common now, right? But it wasn't when we set up Oralis. And basically it has been the preserve of the military complex for 30 years, right? So high frequency electronics is basically an area of frequency and where the waves are essentially millimeters in size, right? As opposed to, microwaves and all that, the lower frequency stuff. And so we were looking, my co-founder and I, Mike Leaves, we were looking at that space, and we'd worked in millimeter wave for quite some time in the aero defense industry. And we were going, looking at communications, right? We needed more bandwidth, right? So we were moving up in the Gs, going from 2G to 3G. And we knew this is going to end up at 4 and 5G, and they're going to go into higher frequencies. They have to, right? There was no space down there. There's loads of space up millimeter wave because it's a pain in the ass to work with, right? The other side of it then was when you go up into those frequencies, you can really do some nice imaging stuff like radar and that. So low frequency radar is kind of the blip that you're used to seeing in World War II movies, right? That hasn't really changed in a long time. But up at high frequency, you can actually do like literally imaging radar, right? Where you start to see visually what's going on in 4 dimensions. So long story short, we were saying the world is moving in that direction. But that was really dominated by the defense industry, which A, doesn't really care about costs, and B, scalability, putting, high-level radars on an aircraft, right, is fine. You can't put that same technology onto a car, both physically and from a cost point of view. So we were saying, right, we need to bring scale to that space. So basically, we set up the company to try and put millimeter waves onto chips and make it more accessible to more people. But of course, what we discovered then, like all things, right, and this definitely wasn't foreseen, was, that gave us a few more customers, but there was very few people could take what's on the chip off it, right? And so again, you end up in that niche of defense. So we broadened that by just putting a few of those chips together and making it a bit more accessible. Slowly but surely, you start to work back, and suddenly you're a systems company, and then you're starting to do, the full gambit, and that opens up lots of different customers. So I think that was really what we did, and that's how I ended up kind of moving towards the automotive industry, because we were one of the first to kind of bring that 4D imaging radar onto that you could put it on a vehicle, that it was at that scale, but it was still ridiculous, right? It was still like the early stuff we built, like 80 chips in there, and it super expensive, but early autonomy didn't care, right? They were like, hey, let's stick it on with the $250,000 LiDAR. Don't worry, your $100,000 radar isn't going to upset anyone. But again, that how scalable could that be? But that company, like you mentioned, we sold it and all of that, but it continues, right? Without me, and it's doing quite well. They've done some super cool stuff. Like they were on a satellite launch last year with like super high speed interstellar communications.
Who hasn't been involved in that though?
Exactly. Who doesn't have NASA on speed dial?
Space dial. I think inventing a new technology there. Now that you've officially bored me to death, no, I'm just kidding. Let's get to the Provizio story. So, as if you weren't already up to some crazy cool things and, having NASA on speed dial, now you're into this world of autonomous vehicles and safety and AI, and it all goes back to safety of the people, which I think is obviously an incredible goal to build a company around. You alluded to how you got kind of segued into the automotive space. How about the safety space? What is it that drew you in about, hey, there's got to be a better way to make people safer on the roads?
Yeah, yeah, and actually, we've led to quite nicely, right? Because it was kind of automotive and autonomy came to us in Oralis, right? They kind of picked up the phone and went, "We want to put this military grade level radars onto vehicles," and the reason was because the industry was failing, right? And it was failing because of the edge cases. This really intrigued me about the autonomous space because coming from an air defense background, that's really obvious, right? The analogy I'd often use is like if I went to NASA or the European Space Agency tomorrow and said, right, I have this incredible idea for interstellar communications or for this radar that will go on the next Philae lander, right? First thing they'd say is, right, okay, let's look at it. What materials can this operate in space? I'd be like, no, 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 no. It can't work in space, but we'll get it working in Arizona and then we'll work out space later, right? I don't know how long I'd last in that building, but it wouldn't be very long, right? But that's exactly what the autonomous vehicle industry was doing. So we were working on some of these programs, and like I was flabbergasted. Like, they were like going, they'd send us a document and say, these are the edge cases we can't solve, right? And I'm like going, that's everything. The only thing you're actually good at is driving around in fucking circles, right? And sorry, that's an Irishism.
No, it's the podcast has an explicit rating, so you can talk about fucking circles all you want. But no, that's great. I'm just that worked as a metaphor, and literally, I know that they're testing them driving in circles.
Absolutely, and then they were like going to tougher circles, and then they were doing it all in Arizona because it was a perfect optical environment. And I'm from Limerick in Ireland, right? West coast of Ireland, sheeting rain like all the time. We love the misery here. Fog, it's got everything. And these are the list of things, like we can do everything except everything that is a problem, right? And so in fairness, we were brought into that, and that attracted me, right? I like hard problems, and like I was going, oh yeah, this is interesting, so let's try and do this. And to be fair, I could see how we could do it, but they weren't concerned about cost and all that. Long story short, after I sold the company, I kind of took a break and really didn't want to do the deep tech thing, started building some other stuff again. And I was going, but you have that niggle, and it just was there, and it was constantly there. And maybe this is where the ego is, and maybe it's a bit of the dyslexia as well of seeing the end result. But I kind of had it in my head, you know what? These guys are taking all the wrong approach. It's not about driving around in circles, right? We actually have a huge problem in automotive. And the same edge cases these guys can't solve autonomy is the actual same reason why we have carnage on our roads, why we have so many road deaths, and why we have so many road accidents. Like all these edge cases are all the reasons we crash, right? And so again, building a system that replicates the human using optics and trying to put a brain in there just seemed dumb as hell to me, because all you're going to do is replicate what humans are doing. So these are the things that bother me when I should be relaxing. So I just started working on it and going back to kind of physics first principles, which is a thing I love to do, and go, actually, let's forget any of this technology ever existed. Let's forget the whole autonomous industry. Let's pretend that didn't happen. If you were approaching this as a problem, if you were approaching driving as a problem, how would that look? And in the midst of this, by the way, I had a car crash, another one.
Oh my
That
God.
was probably the thing. I was on my own. I'd done advanced driving courses, so I was able to save the car and bring it back. And it was some weather I hadn't seen ahead, and there was something like 14 crashes that day in the same stretch of road, right? But I came home then and I was going, right, like seriously, we have to be able to solve this. Like, come on. And I just started working on it. I'm working on what would the sensor look like, and what would the software look like, and how would you do it? And then I was like, it's bleeding obvious. The first thing you do is you'd augment human drivers, right? You wouldn't come out and tell all the truck drivers in America, you're going to be out of business because we're so smart down here in Silicon Valley. We're going to put you all out of work, and then fail, right? You would actually go, and then everyone says we don't trust autonomy, right? And rightly so, because it has been proven that these people didn't have the best of intentions. So I started looking at it going, yeah, you augment the human, and you learn from the human driver as well as trying to teach them, right? So you give them the perception and the foresight that they don't have, right? Like we have weaknesses as human beings in a car that cause crashes, right? And you don't keep blaming them. You try and help them along. And that's kind of started sketching that up. And then I went out to the smartest people I knew, right? So I'd started working with a software group, ex Carnegie Mellon software group, back in my days in the autonomous industry. We were put with them by one of the big autonomy groups. They said, "Oh, if you put your tech with these guys, you could solve a lot of problems." Went to them, showed them what I was doing. Went to the core IP team in my old company in Oralis, like the boffins there, and said, "Look, here's an idea I have. What if we were to try and build this 5D perception?" Was what I called it, right? And said, and I honestly, genuinely wanted them to say, "Barry, this is the dumbest idea you've ever had. Go to the beach." And they didn't. So all the smartest people I ever knew all said, "Yeah, you're onto something here." And they all quit what they were doing and joined me. And then Provizio was there all of a sudden, right? And that was it. And we said, right, and then we started talking to the big car manufacturers and the tier ones and these guys. And to be fair, they were starting to move in that direction as well, right? Autonomy was failing, and so it had an open ear, I would say. And even though they were continuing with some of that stuff, they were going, yeah, look, better advanced driver assistance systems is certainly the way for the next 10 years. And with the way we were going to build that, it had a good audience. So that was kind of where it came from.
Not to compare you to Sir Isaac Newton, but you made me think of the old story of Isaac Newton like getting hit in the head with an apple falling from a tree, and then it made him think of the laws of motion. Same thing with Barry Lunn and getting in a car accident, and it kind of like triggering like, okay, we need to act on this now. So there you go. It's probably the first time you've been compared.
I'll take it. I've been compared to a lot worse. I'll take that one.
Yeah. 5D perception. What is that?
So basically, when you break down the driving problem, right, there's certain things you need to be able to resolve, right? Like you need to be able to operate in all weather. You need to be able to see beyond line of sight. You need to be able to see beyond, cars in front of you. You need to be able to see in 360 degrees. You need color and contrast. You need to be able to read signs, all that, right? So those are the things you need to solve. So when you break that down, right, you need to be able to see the world in 3 dimensions firstly, right? So you have to understand where everything is and all that. Then the 4th dimension, right, which is often referred to, you hear a lot about 4D radar now. That's knowing where you are. We call it SLAM, but it's basically localization. Where am I? Where is everything else? And where is it moving to, right? So that's really, and that comes built in with, nice thing about radar and why radar is so big in the automotive space is because Doppler is inherent, right? So you know the exact velocity of every object you can see. So if you could see the world in 3 dimensions, and then the 4th dimension is, the velocity of every object in that world, and you can see way beyond human. Now you've come a long way towards resolving all this. The 5th dimension then is the perception side, right? Making sense of all that data. And a big part of that is the semantic data as well. So you actually need to be able to read signs. You need to be able to, so it's one thing knowing there is an object going at 100 kilometers an hour, 80 meters away from you, and it's decelerating, right? But what is that object? And that's that's the 5th dimension. That's the perception layer. And I suppose that's what we wanted to see. Could you build the ultimate sensor that could do that? And that's where what we came up with. And it was basically, so your traditional radar is 2-dimensional, right? So it's basically blip out, blip in, and it has a Doppler. So those are the 2 dimensions, right? So and that's what it sees. And then your vision is kind of 1-dimensional essentially. And then you fuse the 2, and this is what's on like 99% of vehicles out there. You fuse the 2, and then you're getting some level of an image, and you're getting a Doppler, and you know what it is, right? So that wouldn't be enough. So we needed to build a 4-dimensional radar. And I'd done this before, but what I wanted to do was build a completely software-defined 4-dimensional radar, right? Which is a completely different thing to do, so that you have this imaging radar. So you get that LiDAR is very popular. You get that LiDAR like point cloud, but at every point in that, the exact velocity and range and all that of it, right? And then if you built it fully software-defined, right, without getting too technical on this one, you could then fuse it at the edge, right? On the sensor, you could fuse it with vision, the vision feed. And now I can apply all that lovely color contrast data, that ability to read and extract all that. I can combine that in. So now I've got this really unique view of the world. And when I go back to all those things, all those edge cases that I need to solve, if I get that right, I can solve all of those edge cases. So that was really what it was about. Like, and by the way, it was a concept, right? I mean, there was an awful lot of stuff we had to work out along the way. And one of the big things we did that I think is different to everyone, right? So your traditional sensor has like a front end that's out there gathering the data, right? And then it has like a digital signal processing there, right? Another big board full of logic and all that stuff that's processing all that data, right? That goes in a black box and someone sells that, right? Bosch, Conti, all these guys, they sell that to the automotive guys. They take what comes out of that box and they go off and try to do some cool AI shit, right? And try and build an autonomous vehicle, right? And that's kind of how it works. But I wanted fully software defined. So we wanted to do that entire back end all on a GPU, right? So GPUs, NVIDIA GPUs, Intel, all these guys that make, and that, so really doing all that in software, right? And that what that means then is you're able to influence and apply AI across the sensor. So basically the black box is no more. The day you get that sensor is probably the dumbest it's ever going to be, and you're going to keep improving that over time. So that was the first big challenge we had to do, and we cracked it. So we were able to, and what that allowed us then to do is, because cameras and vision is already doing GPU processing, right? And VPU processing. Now we're able to fuse the two and get some really unique insights that could never have been done before. So that they were kind of the big technical challenges to kind of prove we weren't completely mad. And it works. I'm almost as surprised as anyone. Like, it works. We now have it built and we're demoing it, and it's really cool.
Can you demo what this actually looks like on the road? Like, if somebody has a car that uses, this technology that you've created, what does that actually mean for how it interacts with the world?
Yeah, and by the way, this isn't the decision we make, right? So this is where the automotive guys get to make that decision, and the OEMs, and they'll make, and that's a layered decision process, right? But okay, let's look at 3 years down the line. Choose your favorite car maker has put our technology onto their vehicle. First thing, by the way, is it doesn't look like an ice cream van. There isn't technology all over the roof, and it isn't $1 million of technology, right? It's low cost sensors built into the body of the vehicle, right? That was really important to us at a low cost, right? That it could be ubiquitous, right? So you won't even see the sensors; they'll be just in your vehicle, right? In terms of how the end user would see it, right, and how they would interface with it, obviously you want as little as possible, right? But in a scenario where you're in a dangerous scenario, first thing you will be getting will be audible and visual alerts, right? So kid walks out in front of you and you haven't decelerated, it warns you and you decelerate, right? But in the cases where you don't, right, or in the scenarios in fog, for example, where you can't actually see what we can see, well, then the vehicle would take over, right? And that's how my approach to autonomy, right? And that's how Provizio sees the future of autonomy, right? Is that it's not about achieving some level of L1, 2, or 3 autonomy on a highway or on a road in Arizona. The way we should look at the autonomy question is, when is it actually unethical to let someone drive? That's the bit that's really interesting for me. So when I've all these sensors, and I can prove it, by the way, only when I can prove it, not when, I need to get my share price up. When I can prove in this scenario, this technology is safer than the person that's behind the wheel, I take over the driving. And that's, I think, where it becomes really important. And that already happens with emergency braking somewhat, but you are talking on a completely different level here. And so, for example, if you're driving down the highway, right, when do you apply the brakes? Is when you see the brake lights and the guy in front of you. But realistically, you needed to see the guy 5 cars ahead, right? Because that's when the problem started. And there's this latency and domino effect that comes along, right? So the next guy's slower than that, the next guy's slower than that. So the chances are you're going to rear end him, right? So in almost half of accidents, right, that it basically it's rear ending, right? And it's lack of foresight. We can see it. We can see out to like 800 meters out in front of the vehicle. We bounce around all the other vehicles. We know the exact velocity of them all. So we see the guy braking up above for whatever reason, and then we start slowing you down in a manner that the guy behind you doesn't hit you either, right? And that, slowly but surely, you're building up all that data. So how we see the world then is, again, the day that car ships to you is the worst it'll ever perform. And over time, because all the physics are there, and this is an argument I always have when people, like, because there's an awful lot of like dumb stuff out there about autonomy and what over-the-air updates. Mother of God, like the crap that people talk about over-the-air updates, right? Like you cannot update physics over the air, right? This is not possible, right? So if it isn't capable, it will never be capable, right? In terms of on a physics level, right? So really what we're looking at doing is making sure you've all that the physics there that can achieve this. And slowly over time, you build up the scenarios, you train the driver, but also I want to know why if I tell a driver to brake and he doesn't, why? So I need that data feeding in. And that's where AI is really good at the heavy lifting of stuff like this, that you can put it out in millions of vehicles and get kind of consensus data back and build stuff from that. So I think, like, to me, honestly, I just think it's a no-brainer, right? Like it's a very obvious way, and you build up the trust, right? So like autonomy guys were quoting for years that over 90% of accidents are caused by human error, right? That's the kind of thing, and it's true, right? When you do and analyze it, but it's because the car and the human together aren't a very good combination, right? So anyway, that's over 90%. But no one ever quotes that 86% of consumers don't trust autonomy, right? So you kind of have to bring them along with you as well. So that's how I look at it, right? And 3 years' time, you're in that vehicle. The car saves your life. You can see it. We're not idiots. We know the car intervened. I didn't see that. I went to do that stupid overtaking maneuver. You're suddenly not going to be as distrustful of autonomy, right? And then as the features grow and they're safe and you're seeing that road deaths are coming down, basically you won't have a choice. Your opinion won't matter. If ethically society won't accept it anymore. It'll be like cigarettes, right? And we look back at that and go, how the hell did we accept that? We're going to look at road deaths and road crashes like that in 10 years, right? That we're just going to go, what the hell were we thinking?
It's a huge depressing problem, but it's very exciting to people like yourselves and companies like yourselves that are tackling it, and the technology has come so far that like I'm fascinated by your example of not looking just at the car ahead of you, but looking 5 cars ahead of you, because obviously what's immediately close to you, obviously that's super important. But if you can get to like the root of what's causing these accidents and these, car pileups and chain reactions like that, that's even better for everyone. With the AI and like the actual testing of this technology, what does it look like when you test and /train/refine this technology?
I'll tell you what it does look like. It looks like a hell of a lot of data, and that's fun, I can tell you, right? And by the way, that's one of the big reasons we had to solve this GPU thing as well, that we could do it all in that, because it means, like, when we started out and we were testing our first boards, just to give you an example, right? When we would go out and do a 5-minute data collection, it would take us a week of processing to get that into the point cloud. In a year, we've gone from that to now we do that live, real time, 20, 30 frames per second, processing all that data through GPUs. That's incredible stuff. And that's a combination of, just pure software engineering and AI. But when I think about AI, I think, like, again, one of the myths that's been put out there, and for various reasons, right, is like people think of the camera as the eye and then the AI as the brain, right? And like there's this brain in the middle that's doing all this thinking like we do, right? That's not how it works, right? So basically there's multiple AI cores across our platform, right? And it's doing different things in different places. But we also do things in the traditional way, right? So I'd much rather a direct detection than one that the AI came up with, right? So that's how we keep all our streams separate. So even though I talked about fused point clouds, we also have just the radar stream. We have just the vision stream. We have AI applied to the radar stream. We have AI applied to the vision stream. Then we have AI is applied to the fusion of the two, right? And AI fuses the two, right? And machine learning AI, I'm interchanging them here just for ease of use. And then we've improvements that we're applying, right? So we can do some really cool, like we can improve the angular resolution of our devices using AI and things like that. So that's almost like free upgrades, right? So like this is the kind of stuff AI enables that people just never even conceptualize, right? So like traditionally what you did, like your radar, you bought it had an angular resolution, it had a range, and it had whatever it did out of the box. And then you waited 5 years for the next generation of it, right? So the devices we built a year ago are now 3 times as good. just through developments in training in AI and ML, right? So like that's insane stuff, and you can imagine, and that gets better the more you have out there, right? So once you get into millions of vehicles, that just keeps getting better. So that's how we think of AI, rather than on the pure decision making thing. AI and ML is being applied all over the place to make every little piece better. And then it's also being double checked by others, right? So that you've got all this redundancy built into your system. Then you start to come back to the decision making stuff. But when people talked about the decision making stuff, and I guess it was just the immaturity of the market as well in the early days. The trolley problem was always brought up, right? Oh, am I going to knock down the kids, or am I going to knock down like that isn't how we think about it, right? We want to avoid a situation where you ever have a ludicrous situation like a trolley problem where I'm going, you should never be in a situation like that. And that's not just us as automotive robotics guys, right? That isn't this is regulation as well, right? Like regulation has a huge role in this, right? And they have a very important decision to make on where they're going to fit into this. And because I mean, we have many years of history to prove that the automotive industry isn't going to behave in the best interest of safety if it's not forced to, right? Like we have all these road data. It hasn't changed in 20 years. Like seatbelts had a massive impact, but we still have 1.35 million people being killed on the roads every year. So basically that's where we'd see, it's a combination of all of those things. It's the expertise within the automotive space where make sure you have a situation where that never happens, where you never, and I do believe we can get to zero road deaths. Absolutely. I think we can get to zero crashes, right? But we can't get there with ridiculous $1 million sensor suites running around in Arizona. The only way we can get there is if we build technology that can be ubiquitous, that can be there for everyone, and that it shouldn't be the preserve of rich people, right?
And what are these car manufacturers saying about your technology, about your company, like about the possibilities that you're creating?
Yeah, it's been really good, right? And that's to be expected a little bit, right? Because this has been talked about for quite some time, and we consciously did this at the beginning, right? So we talked to them all at the beginning, literally everyone, right? And we had contacts, obviously, from years of working in there, right? And told them what we were going to do, and got feedback, and that altered what we built and how we built it, right? And all of that. And then we went into the basement, right? And just started building this, improving it, because there's one great way of differentiating yourself from people in this industry, and that's actually build shit that works, right? And like, you would not believe how narrow the field becomes when you actually go, can you show it to me? Can I drive around in it? Not a snippet that you've like curated from thousands and thousands of hours of stuff, and that you're able to, in this, no, let's go for a drive. Let's see how it performs, right? So that was kind of how we chose to differentiate ourselves. So pretty much a big thing for us was that cracking of everything running on the GPU. Once we had that, we've started doing demos now with the big OEMs and the tier ones and these guys. And to be fair, the reaction's been incredible, right? Because like even, I had a CEO of a major OEM out for a drive a couple of months ago, and like, his reaction was incredible. Like he turned to me and he was like, I didn't think you could do this. I'm like, you couldn't. I couldn't do it 2 weeks ago. Like you're the first to see it, right? And even since then, it's improved incredibly as well. So like, yeah, the reaction's been good. And even talking to, because again, we're agnostic in terms of sensing, right? So we use LiDAR, by the way, and we use all that, and it's really good for benchmarking, really good for training, but like, it's expensive as hell, right? But the big LiDAR guys have, I'm talking to them as well, and they're going, this is pretty cool, and this can do a lot of the stuff. Like, they spend an awful lot of their time trying to solve problems that physics isn't really with them on, right? Like that as an optical sensor, it's not really good at, and processing, right? And having to do all that. And they're going, you guys can do all that heavy lifting, and we could focus on the bit we're really good at. And that, so the reaction from that perspective has been pretty good, right? And then the guys in the middle, like you've the Qualcomms and the NVIDIAs, these guys who are becoming almost the kingmakers now, who are kind of jumping in the middle and going, right, we're the guys that'll process all the data and do all that. Their reaction's been really cool as well, right? Because they're going, wow, this is exactly this is what we've been saying, right? You can do all this on our technology. So yeah, it's a good phase, I guess, Max, I suppose, right? But I'm also very conscious of like, smiling CEOs of OEMs won't feed my kids, right? So we got to turn that into serious production, right? And let's not underestimate that. Like it's no problem get it into, onto vehicles and onto ground truth vehicles and POCs and all that fun stuff. But that path to series production, millions of units shipping consistently into this space, that's where an awful lot of startups have gone to die. So we got to make sure we're the guys that get that right too.
What does OEM stand for, by the way?
Original equipment manufacturer. Yeah, sorry. So the big auto guys, right? So that's your BMWs, your Teslas, your all that.
Perfect. All the ones interested in your ice cream vans.
Exactly. And traditionally, I guess how the structure was, you kind of had the big OEMs, and then you had the big tier ones, which are also monsters. Like some of the tier ones are Bosch, Continental, these guys that sell, and these vehicles are covered in this tech, right? And so some of the tier ones are bigger than the OEMs, right? And then you had the tier twos that sell into those guys, right, to build the chips and do all that. That's all blurred now, right? So we've almost we're having our bit of an iPhone moment in the automotive space, right? Where because basically cars have gone from being very complex hardware with pretty shitty software, right? That's what your traditional car was, right? Now with EVs, right? It's like really basic hardware, right? It's a battery with a top hat, right? And really complex software, right? So that transition's happened really, really quickly. That's completely upsetting that whole nature of things, right? Because the big automotive manufacturer isn't going like, oh, tier one, tell me what are Provizio working on down there in Ireland, and that you'll feed it to me in 10 years time when you see fit. The OEMs are coming to us and going, that is some cool stuff, let's get that going. And then they're bringing the tier ones in on the journey, and we all work together happily. That's the vision.
Amazing what you can achieve with a strong vision, and amazing what you can achieve in the podcasting world with a strong podcast vision. I'm inventing a term, podcast vision. And if you are looking for help in the podcasting world and help refining that podcast vision, trademark, copyright, libel, slander, you can gain insight in the world of podcasting by going to MaxPodcasting.com and signing up for the Podcasting to the Max newsletter. All you got to do is go to the homepage, scroll down a teeny bit, put in your email, sign up. That's the Podcasting to the Max newsletter, full of podcasting tips and behind-the-scenes insight from the Wild Business Growth Podcast. Now, let's get to a combination of segues and acronyms that will make you Rafflecopter. So from OEMs to OMG, what's Barry like behind the scenes? That was, I have to pat myself on the back for that segue, which I'm currently messing up because I'm stumbling over my words. But anyway, let's get to you on the personal side. A bit of kind of you as a entrepreneur and business owner, inspiration, creativity. You mentioned before that you often take this approach, which is physics first principles. Can you give another example of that? Like what does that mean when you're attacking a tricky problem?
Yeah, it's literally going, and you use the right word. It's focusing on the problem rather than the technology, and assuming that nothing existed to solve that problem. What's the best way to solve the problem? I'm worried about the technology later, right? That's kind of the physics first principles approach. It's pretty common actually in the aero defense space, right? And that's why you get some really funky blue sky stuff coming out of that space. And that's what attracts me to it, by the way. Like I'm really attracted to cool technology that solves big problems rather than this boring thing of like, I'm going to build another SaaS product because the market's huge and, the plumbing of the internet is actually exciting. It doesn't excite me, right? I just like, let's build cool shit, right? And that's why all the cool shit came from the aero defense industry, right? We wouldn't have TVs, we wouldn't have mobile phones, we wouldn't have interstellar communications without that industry, right? So, and that tends to be how it works. It's like, here's the environment, here's the problem I need to resolve, and then how do we solve that? And that's the physics first principles approach. That kind of suits, I guess, my brain as well, like, because it tends to be how I think about things rather than, like, I definitely wouldn't be we've always done it that way guy, right? I'd always be like, well, why couldn't you, which is, by the way, really annoying when you're younger, I've noticed, right? Like that really annoys teachers and things like that as well, right? Because it's like, that's because it's in the book and you've got to give me back what it says in the book. So you can imagine, right? It was a two-way thing. I mean, I didn't like teachers, but God, they didn't like me either. So that's how my kind of mind works in everything. By the way, that's like, it's not just in like solving problems. Like if I'm sitting in a bar, like I'm just constantly seeing inefficiencies in the bar, and I could be in the next thing I know, I've got an Excel sheet working out the price of distilling whiskey, and I'm just going, oh, we could solve that way better. These guys are, it's just that, yeah. I wish I could turn it off. By the way, it'd be nice.
That's a really fun problem as well, though. Just anything in the distilling whiskey space, I think, is a good thing to to put some time to, especially in a bar. But I mean, you mentioned time and time again that how like your brain's kind of always ticking and you're always thinking of different problems to solve, which I think is an innate trait of a true entrepreneur. So that's cool on so many levels. But are there any hobbies you have that help to somewhat ease your mind and help to, I guess, distract you from this constant problem solving thinking?
Yeah. It's really interesting the way you frame that, Max, right? Because that's exactly how I think about it. I'm always interested in my own mind. After 40 odd years, you always like working out, how do I think? And it's almost as well how I think about the radar problem, because I always looked at it from the point of view of noise is a big problem in radars, right? And it's one of the reasons that the imaging radars haven't really taken off, because there's just too much noise in the signal, and so the signal noise ratio is wrong, so therefore you don't get something clear. One thing we became really good at is quietening the noise, right? And I often make that analogy to my own brain, that I need to find ways of quietening the noise within my own brain, right? And it's funny in terms of hobbies, like so I'm big into sport, like mad into sport, right? So the adrenaline of even watching it does it for me, but also playing it and that side of things. So I do kind of a lot of things. Like there's my favorite sport is an Irish game called hurling, right? And it basically, an English commentator once described it as a cross between hockey and war. And it's a really fast game with sticks, and people get busted up. It's fabulous, right? It's like hard ball. It's like, and I coach it now. My kids play it and all that, so that takes up a lot of my time, and it's fabulous, and I love it. But I play it a bit as well. Although COVID shut down our over 40s team, but we're trying to get that going again. And I often notice, like, that's when I'm calmest, is when I'm in the midst of battle, in the middle of a field with hurleys swinging around my head. Now I've got a big grin on my face. Like I love that. And I guess I'm always looking for that type of thing. So my big hobbies would be kind of sport and gigs. Like I'm a big into music, live music, and I don't care what it is. I'll see anything live. And the whole art scene, I've always loved art. I love the creativity. I love how other people think. So that's kind of how I spend my time, and I'm lucky that my wife and my kids are into the same thing, right? So we kind of have a good life together of doing that stuff, because I see it with other people, that could be a pretty miserable existence because it's all I want to do, and I'm not big into the whole socializing thing, you know what I mean? I'm a bit of an introvert, so I need those things to get me out.
So you hurled that perfectly to some rapid fire Q&A. So let's wrap up with some rapid fire Q&A. You ready for it?
Well, we'll find out in about a minute.
Okay, perfect. All right, let me pause, take a sip of water for a minute. No, all right, let's get wild. Hurling, that's a sport, I think, especially in the States and probably many parts around the world, that people maybe have heard of hurling but don't know too much about it. You kind of gave like the intro background to it, but what is one tip that makes you a really good hurler?
Bravery. Yeah. You're always looking for it in kids as well. Looking for bravery. Because once you work that out, the kids that get hurt are the ones that are timid. Because if you stand a little bit back from a guy swinging a stick, you're going to get hit by it. If you're up on top of a guy swinging a stick, you're barely going to get any impact. So if you have the bravery and the balls to work that out, you're going to be a great hurler.
Perfect. Well, you just described me perfectly, so I think I need to take it up. What is your favorite thing you've ever created or built? Built's a better word. Built with Legos.
Ooh, oh, it's the Millennium Falcon, right? Joyful thing to build, because I'm a Star Wars guy as well. And on that one, because my kids are big into Lego, they left me alone on that one. They were like, no, he needs this one. And yeah.
They can recognize it in you when you need the alone time. What's in addition to building Legos and your interest in music and the arts and hurling and bravery, what is a weird talent or party trick you have? Something that you're really, really good at, but it doesn't necessarily impact your day job.
Whew, yeah. Do I have a party trick anymore? I think probably one of the weirdest things that people find out about me from when I was a kid was that I played the accordion. And
I was actually going to guess that. You gave off accordion vibes.
exactly. For a long, long time, I played orchestra, right? So yeah. So that definitely shocks people when it gets mentioned. But I've pretty much killed all the people that know that. So it's all good.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Next question. Limerick. I think Limerick is, and I've been to Ireland once, spent a weekend there, and bounced around to a few different cities, and absolutely beautiful country. And also, I think it helped that when we landed, it was perfectly sunny, and the grass. I've never seen greener grass, and I know it rains much more often than that, but just absolutely beautiful country. But I think Limerick is one of the most beautiful names for a city I've ever heard. But I don't know too much about Limerick. What's like one must do thing if you're visiting Limerick?
Oh, so we've got a castle here in Limerick on the river. Like the river is the river, and I can see the river from where I'm sitting when I'm talking to you here now, right? So we have the largest river in Ireland, comes towards its mouth in Limerick and out to sea, right? So, and we've got this incredible castle on it, King John's Castle, and like it's just perfectly preserved, beautiful place. So like just the serenity of the castle. There's gigs on in the castle tonight and tomorrow night. Like going to a gig in the castle is unbelievable. Like you just feel like you're on a different level. But I love Limerick, and I think like because Limerick isn't the flashy town of Ireland, but my wife and I and kids, we've chosen to live here, right? Like we lived all over the world, like in about 10 or 12 different places all over the world, right? Across Asia and America and Europe. And like we chose to come back here because it's a fabulous place. And the thing about it is it's because it's not the capital city or the tourist attraction. So the people have a great edge to them. They're self-depreciating. No one gives a shit. We don't care what you think of us. It's good fun and great work ethic. So I love it here. Yeah.
And then last one, what would be your dream car to use your technology?
Ooh, that's an interesting one. Because I was going to say my dream is actually not to own a car, right? And I've been there before, and that's a really cool place. You know what, right? My kids and I we're super into Defenders, right? Just love them, just the shape. The older one now, the 16 one, right? Maybe rather than the new one. So maybe a Defender, but that DeLorean, right? Like, yeah, I wanted on a DeLorean too. A mate of mine did an autonomous DeLorean over in Stanford, and it's like so cool, right? So yeah, or actually, to be honest, now I'm going to tree, right? But a tractor would be pretty cool too, right? So again, like I like my cows, I like my farms. So yeah, an autonomous tractor would be pretty fucking cool too.
Perfect. Well, I can already envision you captaining the autonomous Millennium Falcon as well. So that would, I think the possibilities are endless. But Barry, thank you so much. This has been fantastic, and really, really appreciate your story and all you do. And it's a really strong mission and problem to kind of rally around. And your enthusiasm and passion and skill for what you do is just off the charts. So this has really, really been special. Where's the best place for people to connect with you personally, as well as learn more about Provizio?
Cool. And look, thanks for having me as well, Max. I've really enjoyed it. Your questions have been super. It's like we've known each other years, Max.
Well, hold on. We're not supposed to tell people that
yet. But in terms of connecting with me, look, I'm on the Twitter machine as Nuvation. I guess like obviously through Provizio, you can definitely get to me there. Our website's about to be updated soon. Apparently, I'm not really good on the marketing side. Or if you really want to connect with me, JJ Bowles Pub in Limerick. There might be a guy at the bar with a pint of Guinness. That could be a really good way to connect.
Oh, perfect. I think that's my absolute favorite way to connect. And last thing, final thoughts. The stage is yours. It could be a quote. It could be reenacting your favorite scene from Star Wars. Whatever you want. Just send us home here.
Oh no! What?
No. Just final thought. It could be quotes or just words of entrepreneurial advice. Whatever you want.
Yeah, look, I think that the only advice I ever give to people is to be themselves and dilute everything anyone else says to them with a lot of water, right? Because I think we spend too much time trying to hone people into a thing, right? And I would never limit yourself by what people told you you're good or you're bad at. Like I see it in coaching. Like so many kids come down to parents tell me, he's not sporty, or or similarly, my kids are big into art, and people say, he's not artistic. Never put that limitation on yourself. You are. I've seen it. So much evidence of it. And so yeah, I would definitely say don't limit yourself.
I've seen it too, and sky is the limit for you. Oh, God. Thank you so much, Barry, for coming on the podcast, sharing the Provizio story, all you do for safety and tech and hurling. And thank you, Wild listeners, for tuning in to another episode. If you want to hear more wild stories like this one, make sure to follow the Wild Business Growth Podcast on your favorite app and tell a friend about the podcast. And then invent some really, really cool technology like Barry's doing, because it's really cool. You can also find us on Good Pods, where there are fantastic podcasts and podcast recommendations and people. And for any help with podcast production, you can learn more at MaxPodcasting.com and scroll down and sign up for the Podcasting to the Max newsletter. Until next time, let your business run wild.
Bring on the bongos!